Good afternoon. My name is David Wooten, and I am the moderator for today's panel discussion on race and business education. For the record, I accepted the moderator role long before our nation witnessed two nationally televised debates that highlighted the challenges of being a moderator. No worries. This is not a debate, it's a dialogue. The goal is not to identify a winning candidate, but to put forth winning ideas. Now, on behalf of everyone at the Ross School of Business, I'd like to thank you for joining us for the first in our Business and Society 2021 series. We launched the series in 2019 with the goal of sparking constructive conversations about the role of business in society and to explore the important economic and social challenges of our time, issues like health, sustainability, and inequality. This year, the entire series is dedicated to discussing issues of race in business and business education. I am proud that Michigan Ross has chosen to initiate this important conversation, and I am thrilled to kick off the series with an amazing panel of 7 deans at leading business schools from around the country. It is my pleasure to introduce Dean Bill Boulding from Duke's Fuqua School of Business, Dean Kerwin Charles from the Yale School of Management, Dean Francesca Cornelli from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, Dean Scott DeRue from Michigan Ross, Dean Nicole Thorne Jenkins from Virginia's McIntire School of Commerce, Dean John Levin from Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and last but certainly not least, Dean Raghu Sundaraman from NYU's Stern School of Business. Now, in terms of format, many questions were submitted through the registration process. So I thank you for your role in shaping the questions that I'll use to guide our conversation. Broadly speaking, I have grouped the questions into 3 main topics. Where are we? How are we doing? And what or how can we do better? I will invite a subset of our panelists to answer each question, and at the end of the session, I will invite each to offer some parting thoughts. Now, without further ado, I invite John and then Bill to answer our first question. How have perspectives on race changed in business education over the course of your academic career, and what are some of the factors that contribute to these changes? John?
Thanks, David, and thanks to Michigan for having this important series, and what an honor to be with this group of fellow deans. So I'm really delighted to get this opportunity. Let me step back and say something a little bit broader, which is that over the last decade, or increasingly in the last few years, there has just been a profound shift of awareness in this country around patterns of inequality, unequal opportunity, the importance of diversity in all organizations. And that has led to very important changes in business schools and in business education that are still ongoing. And I think, all of us as deans have probably, have the opportunity to stand up in front of our current students and look out at them and look at who is in business school today. And I know that for me, the picture that immediately comes to mind is to compare what those faces look like to the faces of the Fortune 500 CEOs or the leading investors in this country, or the top venture capitalists or entrepreneurs or board members. And it's just very different. And the only thing you can think when you look at today's students is, if we do our jobs right in business education, the most important thing we will achieve over the next 20 years or 30 years is to change the face of leadership in this country and probably around the world. And I think that was part of the vision that drove us to start a concerted effort around diversity, equity, and inclusion 3 years ago, appoint a senior associate dean to oversee it. Sarah Soul, she's done an amazing job. And then this year, with the heightened and appropriate focus on racial injustice in this country, to turn our full attention to that, start a lot of discussions and bring out an action plan for racial equity that we are working really hard to execute on with incredible energy and enthusiasm all around our school. And I'm looking forward to hearing about all the things that are going on at my peer schools today.
Bill?
Okay, so I'm going to give kind of a nuts and bolts answer to this question, because I've been around for many, many years in the business school industry, and so I've seen things evolve quite a bit. And I'd say that the first thing is that we started by asking questions: how can we improve as an individual school? How can we get better at what we do? And so this had a number of different phases. First was representativeness. How do we actually get students in our programs that better reflect the population the business community serves, and serves the business community in terms of their desire to populate their ranks with more diverse talent? Then we looked around and we saw we're creating more diverse student communities, but our faculty communities were not very diverse. And so we began to focus on how can we better make our faculty reflect the student population that we serve. From the representativeness dimension, we started to look at inclusiveness, not just counting numbers and getting people in the game, but making sure that people felt like they were on the team. And so I think a number of schools started to work on those dimensions that are very important to the community. And concurrent with all of this was something fundamentally important, which was serious scholarship in the area of diversity and inclusion. Scholarship that helped us understand and identify the value of diversity. Scholarship that helped us understand, why does systemic racism persist? Scholarship that helps us understand, how do we eradicate structural racism? And so with this serious scholarship, that then led to a second phase, which is more current, which is that this kind of content populates our curriculum. It has really flipped from the question of how do we work on this problem and how do we improve, to how do we own the problem? How do we take responsibility to become a force multiplier in tackling these issues of systemic racism? And to foreshadow a question that you're going to ask, to actually flip from lagging the industry in terms of our performance in this area to leading the industry and helping them find the way forward to really deal with these very, very problematic issues. The last point I'll make, which is really embodied with what we're doing today, is that instead of focusing again on our own programs, we're now once again thinking about how do we cooperate across the business school industry. And today's event is a wonderful example of that. The business school industry, normally the deans in this call are competing with each other unbelievably fiercely, but now we recognize here's an opportunity for the third time in my career to come together to tackle a problem together. The first time around gender equity, the second time around immigration reform, and now this time around racial equity and justice.
Thank you, Bill. Now I would like to invite, in this order, Francesca, and then Raghu Sundaram. I'm just mentioning this because I apologize for mispronouncing his name earlier. And then Kerwin, to offer their thoughts on how we should think about DEI as global business schools when some of the issues, specifically those around racial justice, are local. Francesca.
Yes, thank you. It might be clear from my accent, but I am Italian, and I arrived in the US as a dean little more than a year ago after 25 years in London. So for me, this is exactly part of what I'm thinking. And the way I see it is the two sides really reinforce each other. They're very important on both sides. First of all, being global means having to deal with incredible diversity, which is not only race, is religion, is language, is culture. So I feel, how can we be a global business school and equip our students to be global if we are not trying to tackle diversity, equity, racial justice in the country in which we are all based, in our own country? I feel it would be a bit hypocritical. Go out, deal with this diversity, but in our own country, we are not thinking about it. So that's on one side. On the other side, looking at global, you see, right now, for example, I still look at the news, and right now in the UK, they're talking about problem of racism in the Met Police in London. In France, there's huge discussion of racism. In Italy, unfortunately, my country, there's discussion, or going in completely different system, Myanmar, Balkans. The way I see it is, what is to me is very humbling is, here in the US, I'm working with everybody I can to think about what to do, because as other people have mentioned, there are critical systemic issues that we need to address. We can't address alone, and they're very difficult, and we need to think hard. At the same time, I find it very humbling to think that we get in completely different system, different set of institutions, different history, different everything, and yet we still find racism. So that it is telling us how complex the problem is. And we have to learn also by looking at other systems where other system fails when we are tackling here. So I actually feel being global, but based in our own local challenges, it's very important. It can make our thinking about this stronger.
Thank you. Raghu?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was muted. Let me begin first by thanking Scott and you in Michigan for organizing this incredible event. And let me echo Bill's words that I look forward to working with all my fellow deans to take forward this and other important issues. To answer your question, I think I'm going to begin with, is racial justice truly a local issue? I think the idea of the issue of racial justice, undoubtedly there is a local flavor to it. It resonates particularly in the United States for historical reasons that all of us are familiar with: the inhuman institution of slavery, the dehumanization of Black lives that long survived slavery's formal abolition, all issues that we are familiar with. But I think I would question whether issues around racial justice are local in any sense of the word. And here I would argue not for one simple reason. America's soft power, the power of its media and its culture and its reach, is simply enormous. I think one has to have grown up outside America to truly appreciate the extent of this power. What happens in America is followed by the entire world. It greatly influences thinking and events everywhere. For decades, and to some extent even today, the relentless negative portrayal of Black people in media and literature influenced how people in many other countries, many of whom had no direct contact with Black people, viewed Black people. And it has resulted today in the significant casual racism that Black people face when they travel in Asia and elsewhere. But equally, that soft power has the ability to do enormous good, as we have seen with women's rights movements, the gay rights movement, many other movements in America. George Floyd's brutal end made global headlines, but so did the Black Lives Matter protests that followed almost immediately, and they have sparked very similar soul-searching and protest movements from marginalized and brutalized groups across the globe. From the Indigenous Lives Matter movement in Australia to the Dalit Lives Matter movement in India. So what I'm trying to say is DEI issues and racial justice in particular are not local, but they're global issues. And as global business schools, even as we train students for leadership in a more globalized world, these issues have to be an integral part of the education. Part of the reasons that Francesca articulated so well. So as just one small example, in our most recent effort at Stern, every single entering student in our undergraduate program, MBA program, executive programs, they all take the intercultural development inventory assessment to assess their intercultural competence. And every student is assigned a coach to interpret their assessment and to provide a plan for growth. I think this is almost an essential part of creating better leaders for tomorrow.
Thank you. Kerwin.
Sorry. I'd like to echo the comments of my fellow deans here and thank Scott and Michigan for putting on this important event. I'm delighted to be on the panel with my peers. So your question touches on or asks explicitly how we are to conceive of the diversity conversation in a global context when so much of anti-racism and related matters are local. I'm going to presume, despite what was just said, that in point of fact, in thinking about anti-Blackness, for example, it has a decidedly local and American flavor. As has been pointed out, there are issues of diversity and racial heterogeneity elsewhere, but the thing that generates large national and international attention is the anti-Black, anti-racist movement in the United States. How do we as a global business school deal with that, given its local character? It seems to me there are three reasons, at least three. If we focus on the representation issue, that we bring students here from elsewhere, and the bringing of students from elsewhere into our community or into our, wherever we are, whether it's Palo Alto or here in New Haven or in Ann Arbor, means that those students must engage with this matter in, for example, their classroom experience. And so one is in a class, a question comes up, one notices that one's peer doesn't respond or is discomforted by what one says, thus and so. Yeah? And so precisely because we are global, the likelihood of that kind of innocent misinterpretation, yeah, accidental offense giving and the like, means that we have to attend to this issue in an important way for students brought into our midst, because it will affect their educational experience. Our failure to address it thoughtfully means that it will affect the lived experience of the students of color with whom they come into contact. They're meeting these people at the coffee shop. They're having pizza and beers with them. They are talking about their projects together, thus and so. Insensitivity, ignorance, unfamiliarity with these matters raises the likelihood of an unpleasant, albeit unwitting, but an unpleasant interaction, which can affect the experience of their peers. There is also this. So we go and we recruit. We go to a place and we say, look at now, you should come to my school to receive MBA training. And we're successful at it. We get people to come, and they come. And many of them return home. It is this returning home piece that is often prominent or top of mind for me. Because when they return home, they take with them much of what they learned and picked up here, and not only in the finance class or in the OB class. Indeed, that might be secondary. They take with them the kind of tacit signals they receive, how we interact with each other racially, how we deal with this matter, thus and so. And to the extent that they are not well informed and exposed to the best ideas that have been thought about these matters, they take bad ideas about American race back home. But it's worse than that. It's worse than that, because these people are in general not returning themselves to homogeneous communities. There is the issue of race where many of them return, or class, or caste, or whatever. And so we had a chance during their 2 years, 3 years here, to perturb, to disrupt, to uproot, to extirpate the bad notions they may have had about type and race and caste. And we are failing morally, it seems to me, if we do not engage with it in a productive way during their 2 years in our midst. In a way, our being global the fact that we're global raises the ante, raises the stakes in ways I just described for dealing with this matter in our local context. So that's my view about the global-local tension.
Okay, thank you. And now, this isn't a question or a requirement that you give us a grade, but how well are business schools doing with respect to issues of diversity, inclusion, and racial justice? Compared to industry, are we leading or lagging behind? We'll begin with Raghu.
Thank you, David. Honestly, I think it would be hard to argue that we are not doing better than industry. I think one reason is what Jonathan mentioned. When you look at boardrooms and corporate leaderships and CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, and you look at our classrooms, you see significantly greater diversity in the classrooms, and that gives you hope for the future. We also recently that Jane Fraser was just appointed CEO of Citigroup, and she's going to become the first woman to head a major bank in America. Universities and schools in general have done better on this front. When you look at the leadership of our student bodies, our student clubs, and I think in a myriad of other ways, we're doing better than industry. But I'm not sure that I would use that as the right bar. I would like to use a higher and absolute standard. And on that basis, I think there's no doubt that we are improving in many ways, because as was pointed out at the beginning, these are issues that have concerned us for many years, but they've taken on urgency today. And there's no question in my mind that we still have a very, very long way to go on all three issues that you mentioned, on diversity, on inclusion, and on racial justice. On diversity, John already made this point, and Bill also made it, that we're looking at diversifying. We start by looking at the student body, and that means we have to work hard to not just diversify the student body from amongst the applicants, but remove the obstacles, both real and perceived, that typically discourage some historically disadvantaged groups from even applying to business schools. Like some of the others in this panel, we are a business school that has a significant undergraduate population and a significant graduate population. And in each group, we face different challenges in that diversification. The second lies in diversifying the faculty body. This is also something I've been spoken about, so I won't repeat the point here. Then there is the point of belonging. Some years ago, I heard this lovely analogy that inclusion is like being invited to the party, but belonging is feeling comfortable to go onto the dance floor. Admitting people is only part of the challenge. Making them feel like they belong and they're part of CERN, they're part of our business schools, is an ongoing challenge. It's a challenge that's very different for different populations. With our undergraduates, for example, as I presume is the case in undergraduate business schools, our students come from local areas in which the other students look largely like them. So white students are used to coming from areas where white students were in the majority. Students of color are used to coming from areas where students of color were in the majority, and suddenly nobody is in the majority. So the undergraduate population, the issues of belonging are different from the way they are in the graduate program, where students have been working for some years and are used to mixing different kinds of people. The challenges are different and the approaches have to be different. And I think we've progressed quite a bit, but we still have a very long way to go before we can even remotely be satisfied with where we are.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, how are we doing, and are we leading or lagging behind industry?
I guess I have a different opinion. I think we're lagging, and I think we're lagging substantially, in part because there's a huge difference between what we as universities aspire to, what we say we are, and the actual lived experiences of historically marginalized people. And when you go into a corporation or some other organization post-university, you're actually in a more homogeneous set of people. Even though there may not be tremendous racial diversity, you are more similar in terms of socioeconomics, expectation, aspirations with those groups of people. And so the challenges that you face as a historically marginalized people at a corporation are not the same as what you experience on university campuses, which has a far, very diverse set of backgrounds in terms of racial, ethnic diversity, but also socioeconomics. And so I'm sure all of my colleagues have had experiences in your school where there will be an incident that occurs on campus, and it's very inconsistent with who we say we are as universities, but the lived experiences of underrepresented people create such a challenge for individual students and student groups that can change their perspective and do damage to students that last a lifetime. And I think that's where we are very challenged at universities, in part because we are balancing free speech issues. We cannot control student, staff, and faculty the way that corporations have much greater control over the individuals who work there. And that's the challenges that we have, is that we are in a fight for people's hearts and minds, that we want people, that we need staff, faculty, and students to really want to do this work, to want to be inclusive. And those are things that we're unable to legislate. And so that's what I think is fundamentally the challenge that we have at universities. It's such a very difficult thing for us to overcome.
Thank you. Now, Scott, how are we doing, and are we leading or lagging behind industry?
Excellent. Thank you, David. And thank you to the deans on the panel. It's a privilege to bring all of us together and have this conversation. So thank you. I think we're leading and lagging. And I'll try and draw some pieces together from what both Raghu and Nicole said. In terms of leadership, when I look across business schools, thanks to our students, their voices, their empowered voices, their strong desire to be part of the solution to racial injustice and a broader set of diversity and inclusion related issues, I think business schools relative to industry are proactively leaning in to these conversations and the really hard work that's necessary to create awareness, mobilize people to address racism in education, address racism in business. We see issues when we look across universities and business schools. I think more often than not, we are coming to the realization that racial justice and other forms of justice are a core part of our mission. You know, Bill mentioned it earlier, scholarship, research, teaching. We have, you know, someone said earlier, we have both an opportunity and a responsibility, I think, as Kerwin said, because we're a pipeline of talent to industry. And so it's both an opportunity and a responsibility. And so we're leaning into these conversations, such as this one, because we're coming to the realization that this is a core part of our mission. And if I compare that to industry, many companies, many organizations around the world, I don't think have woken up to the opportunity and the responsibility to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core part of their mission. And to those companies, I would encourage them to review closely the data on the value of diversity, the value of inclusion for business results. Because if you care about business results, you also care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think in terms of embracing racial justice and diversity broadly and inclusion, I think we are leading. But there are many ways that we are lagging. And I would agree with Nicole entirely. That we are lagging in many ways around the lived experience that we create for marginalized communities. This notion of diversity versus inclusion or belonging, it is a very different thing than, you know, it's one thing to invite people to the party, to use Raghu's metaphor. It's another thing to have a lived experience where we can feel included, belong, learn from each other, and have a lived experience where we elevate everyone up. And on that dimension, we can and must do better. But I would also argue that even on the diversity side, business schools have a long way to go relative to industry. In my opinion, business schools are not as creative about where they go to discover and recruit talent relative to some companies and industry partners. I mean, look at companies like LinkedIn. LinkedIn reduced its on-campus recruiting across universities by 73% and increased its URM hiring by 23%. How did they do that? By using other channels, more diverse channels than many universities, to identify, recruit, and develop talent. And so business schools, whether it's because of the constraints of our own creativity or more structural reasons such as rankings that don't value diversity, or if you're a public institution, state level policies that restrict diversity in a variety of ways, we as a business school industry have not been as creative about seeking out new and different channels for attracting talent. And on that dimension, I think we must do better. And we certainly are all doing things in this space, launching initiatives, like we just launched our Blau initiative for diversity in real estate and infrastructure. It's an industry-wide problem in real estate. We have a responsibility and an opportunity to help address that. Our ACK initiative for women in finance has doubled the number of women going into finance, at least from the Ross School over the last 5 years. So we have opportunities. We also have a big responsibility, and we are lagging more than we are leading.
Okay, thank you. And so the next question is the last of our questions, kind of really related to how are we doing, or perhaps what's stopping us from doing better. And so I want to ask each person to try to limit their comments to 2 minutes. But what are the major structural or cultural challenges that business education faces in becoming more diverse, equitable, and inclusive? First up is Kerwin.
Did you say me first, Kerwin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, all right. What are the fundamental challenges we face? And I might piggyback on the previous question about how we're doing. It's related. I think there are ways in which we're doing great. We're doing great in some ways. In terms of mere representation, we're not doing badly. Maybe great is too strong. We're not doing badly. There are ways, though, in which I would think we can be better. And I don't want to compare us necessarily to industry, but to the values we proclaim of institutions of higher learning. For example, I think we can do better collectively in talking about the issue of diversity, inclusion, race, anti-racism, etc., in our curricula, so that it is interwoven through what we teach. It is not a standalone separate thing, but it is evident in everything we do. A structural impediment to doing that is that there are fields represented in schools of business that don't naturally include diversity talk, if you see what I mean. It is harder to introduce a topic about race and representation in a class on accounting, say, than it would be if I were talking about a course on real estate law, where issues, you see. And so we are, in a way, our hands are tied in a way by virtue of the subject matter we discuss. We have to be thoughtful and imaginative and energetic and creative to address that structural problem, it seems to me. Another way in which I fear we are not living up to our best values is that a fundamental value for all of us should be the free and open and vigorous exchange of ideas. I worry, my view about the need to diversify, the way we should address anti-racism and the like, my views on that matter are very well known. Students know it, and my colleagues and faculty know it. But I want students in a classroom to come into collision with ideas different from the ideas they have. I talked to our students recently, and they were surprised to learn that there are faculty members at great universities who are nervous about diversity initiatives or pushes. I disagree with those faculty members. The point is that at a university, unlike business, unlike other things, we traffic in ideas. And I would want us collectively to be a place where during their 2 years, students feel comfortable, and spaces are created for that kind of open, vigorous, and free conversation. I candidly feel that we are doing less well at that than we might. I further feel that that's our business, yeah? And we should be very attentive to that. I don't know if I answered the question exactly, but it's a genuine feeling.
Okay, thank you. Scott, what are the major structural and cultural challenges? 2 minutes.
To your point, David, I think there's both structural and cultural challenges. We are, after all, talking about a long history of injustice, inequity, and we're talking about system change. And so there's both structure and there's both cultural elements of that system change. On the structural side, we can look at a number of dimensions. Rankings drive behavior for a lot of business schools, looking industry-wide. And to date, our rankings have favored things like selectivity, test scores, GPAs, over diversity or over inclusion or equity in terms of the lived experience of students, for example. We also have university and in some cases, public institutions such as ours that have policies and structural practices that put other factors ahead of diversity and in some cases actually undermine our attempts to enhance diversity or create a climate and a lived experience that is more equitable and inclusive on campus. And so from a structural perspective, I think there's a range of dimensions. From a cultural perspective, the word that comes to mind for me is entrenchment. Business schools, and Kerwin was referring to some of these elements. Business schools hiring faculty from the same places they've always hired faculty, and those places not becoming more diverse over time. Entrenchment in terms of what we teach and how we teach, and the intersection of business school curriculum with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And nowadays within the United States, but to Francesca's point earlier, throughout Europe, throughout other parts of the world, we are culturally more divided than we have been in a long time. And people seem to think somehow that if one person gains, it's a loss for them. And to me, that zero-sum mindset holds us back from making real sustained progress. From a cultural perspective, there's a significant amount of change that needs to happen. And we as business school deans, I think, again, have an opportunity, but also a responsibility to use our platform to lead and serve as a role model for that change.
Thank you, Scott. John, major structural and cultural challenges. 2 minutes, please.
Like Kerwin, I want to link it back to the prior question about business schools in relation to industry. And I think it is really important to keep in mind that as educational institutions, we are just fundamentally different than industry. And part of that is that education itself is fundamentally about encountering difference. Different people, different cultures, different ideas. And it's important to keep in mind that that is at the core of our mission of exposing people to that difference. That's what enables us to sort of deliver on what we're trying to accomplish. And if you come at it from that lens, there are areas where I think we are doing better than we have historically. Certainly student representation, faculty representation, although that moves much more slowly, staff representation, and so forth. I think the areas that are the most difficult have to do with creating an environment on our campuses that enables us to benefit from the changes in the composition of our students and faculty, that puts people, as Kerwin said, into collision with one another in productive ways, and that draws out people's different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and different perspectives or ideologies. And that's just a very difficult thing to do, actually. And it's particularly hard when it's a fraught environment in the country for having respectful disagreement and engagement. And I think we're all, I think it's incredibly important, though, that we commit ourselves to that and try to do everything we can to make our campuses places where anyone can come and just feel, this is my place. I can speak up. I can share my view. I'm going to be listened to. I'm going to be heard. And people are going to learn from me. And I'm going to do the same in response. I'm going to do everything I can to listen to the people around me and try to learn. And, I think we have to commit ourselves to that. And, if we had to give us a grade, we're an incomplete, just like the country is on these issues.
I like the grade. Thank you. And so, Nicole, major structural and cultural challenges. You have 2 minutes, please.
As I said before, some of the major challenges that we have are the rules that govern our institutions, particularly those of us that are at public institutions, what we can and cannot do. I agree with the response in terms of inertia, but the opportunity and I think the responsibility that we have as business school leaders is to look at some of the gating factors that we have that students have to go through to gain admission. So the conversation that we've been having at the Commerce School here at UVA is around what in our pre-com major is necessary to be a successful business major, and what is just a nice to have or something that helps us have a smaller pool of students to select from. So I'll give one example is calculus. I was an accounting and finance major undergrad, and I've talked to our faculty around, do we really need calculus? Or are there just some aspects, there's some things that are taught in the calculus class that are quite helpful to finance and accounting majors? And if we know that students from low-income backgrounds are less likely to have had calculus in high school, are we then creating a perfect storm where students from specific backgrounds are going to be less able to gain admissions to the School of Commerce? And I think those are necessary conversations for us to have, because those are things that are exactly 100% in our control. I think that's important for us to think about and have conversations around. Additionally, we have challenges with our alums, with our rankings, and this external pressure that we have to maintain these historical high quality perceptions. And at some point, we have to have conversations around what are we willing to give up to achieve what we know to be the right thing, not just for historically marginalized students, but for all the students that we teach. We're in a transition where more than half of students or half of people in the United States under the age of 18 are people of color. And there's a transition that is occurring. And if we as business schools do not do a better job at preparing our students for the world in which they're going to be transitioning, as particularly as they are sitting in this sandwich generation, they're going to experience this transition over the course of their working lives. You know, we're going to be the institution that's responsible for that failing. So we have to make these changes. It's going to be for the betterment of our students.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to shift a bit to what I'll think of as solutions, what or how we can do better. So for the next question, I'll begin with Bill and ask, what approaches can leading business schools take to increase the diversity of their student body?
Thank you. So there's some basics in terms of connecting to the right groups, management leadership for tomorrow, Jumpstart MBA, and so on. But I actually think that the key to success here is very much related to what we've just been talking about, which is to say that I think every school has to ask itself, what do you stand for? And are your values clear? And do you live those values? Because ultimately, your ability to recruit effectively is going to depend on the climate that you create within your organization, your ability to create this real sense of belonging. And the best recruiters that all of us have, if they're in the right place, are our current students and our alumni. And so here's where things then get a little bit wonky, which is, depending on what you stand for, you have to recognize that not everyone will support your efforts. And I think that this is very important to realize that not everybody is going to be completely on board with all the things that you're trying to do to create a more diverse, more inclusive environment. And in fact, what we know in terms of system change is that the more you try to drive these changes, the more the status quo will organize to resist those changes. And so a fact of life is that in the business community in this country, it has been dominated by white males for many, many years. And so the status quo is white male. And so the reason why I flag this is that resistance to change then creates narratives. One which I think happens in any kind of organization, and another one that I think is actually unique to a business school environment. So one narrative that I imagine all of you have experienced, if you haven't, lucky you, but the false narrative of, or a false dichotomy of either you choose diversity or you choose excellence. And that there is some trade-off that you must accept in order to pursue diversity. And the reality is you will have people in your community who are saying these things, and you have to be prepared to say what you stand for and why you do not believe in that false dichotomy. A second thing that pops up, I think, is unique to business schools because we are so dependent on the paradigm of market economics. And so the notion here is that competition certainly will eradicate any behavior that reveals discrimination, that we will compete that away. And therefore, this leads to the argument that we shouldn't look at any kind of diversity issues, rather we should have a pure meritocracy. And so I think the arguments around meritocracy actually connect directly to our reliance on market economics as a solution. But here's the shocker. Even those of us who are economists by training realize that markets fail. And so we have to make sure that people understand that markets fail and that we need to take actions that will, in fact, remediate some of these issues that are so persistent. And so if you ignore those narratives, I think you do so at your peril. And the point is, you have to confront these issues head on. You have to create an environment where you talk about these areas of disagreement and bring out why it is one person believes one thing and another believes another. But at the end of the day, what do you as an institution stand for, and what commitments are you willing to make to get to where you want to go?
Thank you. I can imagine my students snapping their fingers when you alluded to the false dichotomy between excellence and diversity. Next, John, what approaches can leading business schools take to increase the diversity of their student body?
Well, I think this is something that we have spent a huge amount of time thinking about at Stanford, and I know that's going to be true for all of my fellow deans here. And I'll just start by saying I don't think there's any one single thing. There are many things, and the places where we have been successful have involved doing many things in a sustained and focused way, and being persistent. I think one of the ways that we have had some of our best success is by working with our students and our alumni. In terms of, we've put a lot of work into outreach and into trying to expand our applicant pool to reach groups that were historically underrepresented. Our students over the summer will run hundreds of coffees with prospective applicants from underrepresented populations. That's been tremendously valuable to us over the last several years. I think we try to do a lot of measurement. So we try to look very carefully at what our applicant pool looks like, what our class looks like, and I think you have to measure if you want to see if you're going to make progress and get anywhere in terms of representation in a class. And that's really paid off for us in areas like gender equity, where we've just about at parity, in things like attracting more international students, having students from all around the world, being global. And it's starting to pay off in attracting students under larger numbers of underrepresented minorities from the United States, but it's an area that we need to work, certainly we need to work harder in and keep focused on and have more progress to be made. And we need to use all the tools, and we're trying to be creative now in thinking about working with historically Black colleges in terms of partnerships, in terms of better outreach. And I think we will make progress in that area. But we're gonna have to work really hard at it and be focused on it. And I think we'll follow the same philosophy, which is to try to not limit ourselves to one tactic, but try different things, experiment, see what works, and measure so that we can see what's working and what's making a difference in terms of increasing the representation of our applicant pool. And then when it comes to selection of candidates, I think, that was just the right way to say it, which is that we just want to attract an incredibly talented group of students there, and a group of students who will collectively come together and form an amazing class. And so we don't think of it as a trade-off between excellence and diversity. We think of those things are part and parcel together. And I think that's a good philosophy to go into an admissions process with.
Okay, thank you. Francesca, what approaches can leading business schools take to increase the diversity of their student body?
Yes, so a lot of things have already been said, but let me give, what I'm thinking. First of all, I don't think we can act alone. And I don't say only cooperate among business school. I think is much more. For example, I do struggle, we do have to reach out earlier. There's an issue of creating a pipeline if we're serious of diversity. It means reaching out to our universities, reaching out even earlier. So there is a general problem. I don't feel as a business school alone we can do it. We should have to cooperate with other institutions, cooperate with people earlier, and make it much more general. A second one is I feel that it's not enough to admit the students, then we have to give them a great inclusive experience. And that goes back to a bit what Nicole was saying, because it's enough the weakest link and then is not doing it. So that is very difficult, because then you need everybody to participate, right? To really make it in that way. And it is difficult, but we really have to try hard to do that. And to me, the way I'm trying to think at it is not only their experience now, but even after, right? Afterwards, we are not telling our student, come and you're gonna have 2 great years. We are saying them, come and we are changing the rest of your life. We are having an inflection of your career. So we need to start thinking, okay, we admit you, and then we feel responsible for really make it true to our promises. If there are challenges, we have to be there. And I feel, it will make it clear more to people that it's worthwhile. And finally, it's been already mentioned by Scott and Nicole, but I want to come back is about how to evaluate people when we taking them in. People who have different background, different history, different environment, different equitable situations. And I feel that, I think it's a natural thing. We feel more comfortable in criteria when we admit, when we measure them, when they are measurable criteria. And I say it as a finance professor, I really like to measure things. But then how do you adjust for different things? What's the adjustment? I think we really have to kind of let a bit go with this and look at the person and say, what is the potential of this person? And yes, I can't measure it, but there's a lot that we learn by dealing with our students. We should, if we are serious about us as educator, we should look at these people and say, what is the potential of this person? What is the potential contribution of this person? And feel comfortable with where we are going and do that.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to ask the same question, but slightly differently. And this is about the diversity of the faculty and staff. And in the interest of time, again, can I keep us to 2 minutes? First up, Nicole, what can we do to increase the diversity of faculty and staff?
Sure. I think one thing that we do at universities is we put a lot of authority and responsibility on the faculty, but it's not clear that we help our faculty to execute accurate assessments in the hiring process, either for staff or for faculty. So we must teach faculty the managerial skills they need to successfully coach, mentor, and collaborate all members of the university community. This will not only help historically marginalized individuals, but everyone in the organization. So some of this could look like de-biasing methodologies being used in our hiring and evaluation practices for staff and faculty, expanding the way that we evaluate faculty. So we generally evaluate faculty based on their research productivity and their classroom instruction. But what if we also had expectations for senior faculty around true mentorship of junior faculty, all junior faculty? And we were more robust in how we evaluated faculty's ability to create inclusive classrooms. So I think these are some of the things that we could do that would really go a long way in helping historically marginalized individuals that we do recruit to the organization be retained and thrive in the organizations.
Thank you. Kerwin, 2 minutes, please.
I will echo everything that Nicole said. I agree with every word she said. And in interest of time, I just want to point out that with respect to faculty, I think it is useful for us to approach this concern, this problem, as a market-wide concern. We are engaged, all of us, in a kind of faculty musical chairs, by which I mean, I can improve the diversity of the School of Management's finance team, to pick a group. But in Equilibrium, I end up doing so by raiding Virginia of one person and stealing somebody from John. Do you see? So the John and Virginia end up one down, and now I'm one better, and then you do it to me next week, thus and so. With respect to faculty, it seems to me that the most pressing concern is to increase the pipeline so that we are not engaged in perpetuity in a mere shifting around of a few addresses. That's one point. I feel very strongly about this. And I think if we were to collectively, for example, figure out a way to encourage PhD training of young students of color in fields from which we hire, figure out a way to encourage postdocs, leaves of absences and other things to get careers off the ground, we would address this most fundamental problem that prevents us from achieving diversity. I'll stop there.
Okay, Raghu, same question, please.
My apologies. I think the question is, when we first start looking at about how we hire faculty, Kevin just mentioned the pipeline problem, and that's undoubtedly very significant at the senior faculty level where we just raid from each other. But it's especially also true at the junior faculty level. How do we hire faculty? Our faculty go to a list of top schools, typically the schools they graduated from or their colleagues graduated from, and they hire from there. Where do these schools get their PhD students from? Again, there's a standard pipeline that they use to get PhD students from certain locations, from certain countries. I think the key thing we need to do is to break that pipeline challenge and use other ways of attracting faculty into the profession. So I'll just talk about 4 things we are doing at Stern. One, of course, we are casting the net a lot wider, and we are going beyond just the standard 10 schools we hire from, which is all the schools on this panel. And we're looking beyond that at talented people. But the second thing we're doing is we launched 2 years ago something called Diverse Pathways, where we go to talented PhD students from underrepresented populations, but not in business schools or even business related. We go to students who are doing their PhDs in psychology, sociology, social psychology, related disciplines. And we brought over 18 of them to Stern to spend time with our faculty to learn about what is it that people in business schools do, and is this something you might be interested in for your career? So this was a proactive way of reaching out to people who might, because they're in arts and science schools, may not have automatically thought of business schools as an option, and to talk to them. So they spoke to 23 of our faculty over 2 days, interacted very intensively. And if even a few of them express an interest in business schools and apply to one of our competitors or to us, we'll be delighted. Third thing, we are in an urban environment. We draw on the adjunct faculty from the talented professionals in our area. So we're working with our alumni to try and change the kind of adjunct faculty we are drawing in. Because one thing we are very conscious of, to our students, a professor is a professor. They don't really distinguish between adjuncts and full-time and contract. They see a teacher in the classroom. So even our guest speakers, we are trying to diversify. Fourth, we brought in a postdoctoral fellows program that was also launched a few years ago, where again, talented but underrepresented groups, they get mentorship from a single faculty member for 2 years with whom they work in close collaboration before they go on the job market, hopefully to join one of our competitor schools. And fifth, to John's point, my predecessor, Peter Henry, his former colleague at Stanford, Peter launched a program at Stern called the PhD Excellence Initiative, which is jointly funded by the Sloan Foundation and the Stern School, where again, we bring in students of extraordinary talent from underrepresented backgrounds and train them on economic research. Then they apply, and all of them have joined top places for their PhDs now. I think there's an enormous pipeline problem, but much of it has to do with the way we do hiring, and we need to break that with the way we do hiring. And so we have a multi-pronged approach in trying to do this. I'm sorry, that is a much longer answer than you wanted, but it's an issue like the student diversity issue on which we've been putting lots of attention to breaking the way we do things with students, with faculty. So.
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time, so I want to ask the presenters or the panelists for the last question, if you can quickly, 1 minute, but this is an important one. I hear many students of color especially express doubts about business schools, that business schools are producing graduates that are actually prepared to enter or lead a diverse workforce. And a lot of the conversation is essentially, we do these diversity things and the same people come. It's like preaching to the choir. And so what can we do to broaden the conversation to include students who would not otherwise engage in DEI topics? And for that, we have Scott. 1 minute, please.
Sure, David, two things. First, I would say that every student needs to understand that diversity is not only an issue of social justice, but it's also good business. And so every business leader in today's global marketplace must be able to lead diverse teams, build inclusive organizations. And so that every student needs to understand that at a really deep and profound level. And then on a much more tactical level, I think, and all of our schools are doing this in a variety of ways, I know that to be true, is reimagining the curriculum and the student experience, both inside and outside the classroom. Mandating training and those sorts of things have very mixed results, but integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into the core experience, so that when we're talking about marketing, we're talking about cross-cultural issues that arise when segmenting your markets globally. When we're talking about finance, we're talking about inclusive access to markets. So when we're talking about the business fundamentals, diversity has to be integrated and woven into that in a really deep and profound way. If we can get everybody to understand those two things, we'll be in a much better place.
Okay, thank you. Francesca.
Yes, so I am working with some of the faculty more specialized here. What we are trying to do is really embedding it, making it a strategic issue and embedding it in our culture. Typically, what we say at Kellogg and we go out of saying, we've always said, is that we have a very cooperative culture, a very collaborative culture, and that we create leaders with empathy. Well, if you don't have inclusiveness, if you don't appreciate DEI, how can you cooperate? How can you have empathy? So we are trying to make it, this is not DEI, we are going to try to make more courses, but we are trying to say, this is who we are. This is part of the everything, in everything which is co-curricular and creating, not only curricular, but creating the culture that we are doing at Kellogg. The inclusion aspect is going to be a part of it, as obviously, if you don't have that, how can you claim to be a cooperative person, to have a person with empathy? So we're trying to make it, this is who defines us.
Thank you. Bill, please.
I think this is a serious issue and an important question, because the reality is that you will end up having self-selection where only the people who care about these issues and are on one side of these issues end up talking to one another. I also want to follow up on what Scott said, which is, in fact, I think the evidence on mandatory training is quite negative. And so many people think that's a solution, but it can actually set you back instead of forward. And so what's interesting, though, is that all of us actually have mandatory training. We just call it the core. And so whether it's mandatory training in finance or accounting or diversity and inclusion, we have the right to make these decisions in terms of what do we think are the core capabilities necessary to be the effective manager and leader in the world today and tomorrow. And so we just don't call it mandatory. We say it's in the core. And I think all schools are really pushing hard to see what can go in the core, in addition to, for people who want to go deeper, what can you add in terms of the elective space? And I think those are really critical opportunities.
Okay, and so before I invite each of the panelists to offer their parting thoughts, as someone who's devoted much of my academic career to issues of equity and access, I want to offer my sincerest gratitude to our panelists for their thoughtful contributions to this important conversation. Now, I'd like to invite first Bill to offer a parting thought.
Okay. So first of all, many, many thanks to the Ross School for hosting this. David, thank you for putting up with all of us and keeping us on track. So for those of you who know me, you know I am certainly not deep. I am not sophisticated. So please don't laugh when I quote the poet Yeats. And in fact, I'm not going to quote any poetry. I'm going to quote something I actually understand. But what Yeats said was an extraordinary insight, which is talent perceives differences, genius unity. And if you look around in the world today, my opinion is that you have many talented people playing up differences in a negative way and increasing the degree of polarization and separation that we see in the world. And so what we really need today is the genius to tackle the persistent and pernicious issues of systemic racism. And in my opinion, the scarcest dimension of genius that we need is not IQ, it's not even EQ or emotional intelligence, but DQ or a decency quotient. And what we need is the decency to actually care about one another, to bring the best out of one another and give people the opportunities that they deserve. And so in my opinion, decency compels us to act, to dismantle systemic racism, and to act now. Thank you.
Thank you. Kerwin.
Very little to add to the eloquent comments that just precede mine, so I won't go on unnecessarily. I will say that it is useful for us as leaders in the business school environment to articulate why it is that diversity, inclusion, belonging, and related concerns are so important to us. In many ways, that's the most important thing we do as leaders. We speak for our institutions. It seems to me that reminding people, reminding all of our constituents, our alums, our faculty, the broad university, that we must address diversity, equity, and belonging, anti-racism, and related themes, because it is essential to our pedagogy that one cannot teach as well as one otherwise might if the class sitting before you on Zoom or in person, all is the same. The quality of instruction and what goes on in the classroom is diminished. Further, we're training people, after all, for success in the real world, to leave our hallowed halls and to enter and have successful careers in business. And so we cannot prepare people for successful careers in society, broadly, in business, narrowly, unless they have come into close contact, meaningful contact, with a diverse, heterogeneous group of people during their training. We remind people, finally, that we have a moral obligation to attend this issue. Our institutions played a role in generating some of the racial inequities we observe today by historically not admitting certain people from particular ethnic groups, or not engaging with this issue in 1968 or 75 or 88 the way they could have. We have come belatedly, I would argue, to an aggressive engagement with this problem. And because of our late start, we have more to do. So communication for me is an essential part of what we do, and I'll just stop there.
Next, Francesca, please.
Yes, I'll be very brief because I think what everybody's been saying until now makes me, what I think is, sometimes I think what happens if we don't get this right? It's such an important issue. I mean, it's just beyond the business school, it's just beyond the do we look good. If we don't get this right, it's really our future. And it's so important, and that makes the stakes I think are so high, much more than me and my business school and the students in the business school and everybody involved. It's so much higher. So I think we have to try in any possible way. I said before, the problem to me is so humbling how complex it is. But it's the impact that can have. There's few things I feel that we could have that could make more of a difference for our future. So I always, whenever I talk to the students, I always end by saying, but I am an optimist. So let me finish by saying, but I am an optimist. I feel, you can see the fact that, going back to global, the fact that everybody in every country, there's now, you hear people, everybody talking about this, talking about actually the US, talking about racial injustice US. I think, there is enough of a momentum. Doesn't make the problem easy, but I think if we should really try right now as hard as possible.
Thank you. Nicole.
So 2 quick things. I just wanted to highlight the PhD project and the work that they've done with increasing the number of historically marginalized individuals with PhDs in business. And I encourage anyone watching who may be interested in recruiting or earning their PhD that they check out phdproject.org. The other thing very quickly is that we've told students, if you work hard, you go to college, you'll have a great career. And it all depends on you. Without really pulling back and saying to students, the reality is there's so many other things around you that determine your success. The family of origin that you have, the passport that you hold, and the race that you are. And those systemic things are really important. And I think the opportunity that we have at business schools is to tell all of our students that, yes, you are hardworking, you are smart, but your success is not solely due to your hard work and your effort. There are systems and structures in place that contribute to and detract from one's success. I think the point that if we can get in front of our students and explain that to them and help them make that connection, they will have a much deeper appreciation for the racial inequality that exists in the United States.
Thank you. John.
So this has been, in many ways, an incredibly difficult year. Just maybe unprecedented difficulty in all of our lifetimes. But it has had some silver linings. And one of them is that it's forced all of us to go through a process of incredible innovation in just about everything we do. And this event is an example of that. And another is that it has just focused all of our attention on the issues we've been discussing today in an incredibly productive way, and in a way that has a lot of potential to help the whole country. And I think one thing that's, I think, always important to keep in mind in all of our roles is that all of our institutions, at a fundamental level, we exist to serve the public welfare. We have a fundamental public mission. Whether we're a state school or a private institution, that's true either way. And I actually think that one thing that this year has done is that it has given all of us at business schools a sense of renewed purpose for that fundamental mission. And so I really appreciate seeing this group come together and hearing all of my colleagues, deans, speak on these issues so eloquently and well, and Michigan for having convened us and taken the lead in organizing this great series, and makes me also very optimistic for what we're going to individually and collectively accomplish over the coming years.
Okay, thank you. Raghu.
Thank you, David. Bill began by almost quoting Yeats. I'm actually going to go ahead with a quote of one of my favorite poets, the Harlem Renaissance poet, Langston Hughes. I think my fellow deans have articulated the challenges, problems that we are facing far better than I could have. We've come out of a season of despair, but also a summer of hope. Immense challenges, but there's also optimism because of what we are facing. And here is where this particular poem of Langston Hughes resonates with me very deeply. I don't know how many times this summer I looked at it, even though it's imprinted on my brain. This is a poem all of you know called Dreams. He says, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow." This is a time for action. It is a time for us to move together on what we're doing, but it is also a time to make sure that we don't lose the dreams of a better future, and we have a precise idea in mind of what it is that we're moving towards. So thank you, David, and thank you, Scott, for organizing this wonderful event.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to invite Scott to offer his parting words and to close the show.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And like my colleagues, I too am an unwavering optimist, and I'm inspired by the optimism that is apparent in this group. First and foremost, let me thank David Wooten for moderating. We may not be as difficult as our presidential candidates, but moderating a group of 7 deans is no small task. So if we could give a big thank you to David, I would appreciate that. Second, I want to thank my fellow deans. It is a true privilege to join you all for this dialogue. I respect you, I admire you and the work that you do. And I feel like we're part of a community, part of a family that is all sharing a common set of values and a common mission. And so I just want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you. And then lastly, I want to reiterate the importance of our collective commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, not as a moment, but as a movement. We need a sustained movement whereby all business schools, all universities embrace the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core part of our values and our mission. We need a sustained movement whereby we recruit diverse talent and help them develop the skills to thrive in a diverse workforce. And we need to be role models for other schools and industry and business. And it's in that spirit that I want to just, again, thank my fellow deans for joining the discussion today. It's not every day that we get to come together like this, but it is always a joy when we do, and it is truly inspiring to know that we're all in this together. This moment is our call to action to really ensure that we're part of a sustained movement that creates real and lasting change. And if we do that, our society globally and locally will be better for it. So thanks to everybody who joined today. I hope this conversation has inspired you and look forward to seeing everybody very, very soon. So thank you very much.